The envelope sat on my kitchen counter like a ticking bomb. Thick, creamy paper, with my name, Evelyn Harper, scrawled in perfect calligraphy. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. My brother's wedding invitation. To the woman he cheated on me with? Yeah, you heard that right. My younger brother Theo was marrying Clara, my ex-girlfriend of 3 years, and they had the audacity to invite me to their joyous union. I stared at the envelope, my hands shaking a cheap keychain, shaped like a tiny lighthouse dangling from my keys next to it. That keychain was the only thing grounding me, a stupid trinket from a road trip with Clara when we were still in love. Now it just mocked me. 6 months ago, I walked into Clara's apartment to surprise her after a grueling week at the community centre where I work. I'm a social worker, 32, always trying to fix things, people systems myself. I thought Clara and I were solid. We'd been planning to move in together, maybe adopt a dog. But that night I found her on the couch with Theo, my 28-year-old brother, who's always been the charming one, the one who gets away with everything. They didn't even hear me come in. I stood there frozen watching my girlfriend and my brother tangled up like they belonged together. When Clara finally saw me, her face crumpled, but Theo just looked defiant, like he'd won something. It just happened, Evie Clara said, her voice small. Theo didn't even apologize. He just said, "You deserve better than her anyway. Better than her." He was my brother. I left without a word, drove home and cried until I couldn't breathe. The next day, I blocked Clara's number. Theo tried calling, but I didn't pick up. My parents, Diane and Tom, were no help. Mum kept saying, "These things happen, honey. They're in love." Dad just stayed quiet, like he always does, when things get messy. I stopped going to family dinners. I threw myself into work, helping kids in foster care navigate their own broken worlds, because fixing their problems was easier than facing mine. Now this invitation. I tore it open not because I wanted to, but because I needed to know how far they'd go. The card was elegant gold embossed, announcing Theodore Harper and Clara Nguyen tying the knot at a vineyard in Napa Valley 3 weeks from now. Tucked inside was a note in Clara's neat handwriting. "Evie, we'd love for you to be there. It would mean so much to us and to your family. Love, Clara, love." The word felt like a slap. I crumpled the note and threw it across the room, but it landed near that damn lighthouse keychain, staring up at me like it knew something I didn't. I called my best friend Marcus, a graphic designer who's been my rock since college. They invited me to their wedding, I said, my voice shaking. Theo and Clara. Can you believe this? Marcus didn't miss a beat. That's some next-level nerve. You're not going right. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to show up, prove I'm not broken. But the other part wants to burn the invitation and move to another continent. Don't do either, Marcus said. If you go on your terms. Not to prove anything to them, but to show yourself you're stronger than this. He was right, but the idea of facing Theo and Clara, of standing in a crowd of people who knew I'd been betrayed, made my stomach churn. My cousin Jenna called later that day, her voice dripping with gossip. Everyone's talking about whether you'll show up, Evie. Aunt Diane thinks you should go to heal the family. But Uncle Tom said you're probably too hurt to face it. That did it. I wasn't going to let my family turn me into the sad, broken sister who couldn't handle her brother's wedding. I decided to go, but I wasn't going alone. I needed someone to have my back. Someone who could make me feel like I wasn't walking into a lion's den unarmed. That's when I thought of Jude Callahan, a volunteer at the community centre. He's 34, a former foster kid turned carpenter, with a quiet strength and a laugh that makes everyone around him feel safe. We'd bonded over late-night coffee runs during outreach programs, swapping stories about our messy lives. He wasn't my boyfriend, but he was someone I trusted. I texted him, "Hey, want to do me a huge favor and be my +1 to a nightmare wedding?" His reply came in minutes. "Nightmare wedding I'm in. Tell me when and where." I smiled for the first time that day, but as I picked up the lighthouse keychain, twisting it in my fingers, I felt a pang of something I couldn't name. It wasn't just about Clara or Theo anymore. It was about me, about whether I could walk into that vineyard and come out whole. The 3 weeks before the wedding felt like training for a marathon I had no business running. I threw myself into what Marcus called Operation Rise Above, a plan to walk into that vineyard looking like I had my life together, even if I was falling apart inside. Marcus dragged me to thrift stores and boutiques in San Francisco, hunting for the perfect dress, something bold, but not desperate, classy, but not boring. We settled on a deep emerald gown with a high neckline and a slit that showed just enough leg. "Green's your power color," Marcus said, grinning as I twirled in the mirror. "It says, I'm thriving, and you can't touch me." I wasn't so sure about thriving, but I wanted to believe him. Jude was a lifesaver too. We met up a few times to rehearse for the wedding, which mostly meant grabbing tacos and plotting how to survive the weekend. He suggested we come up with a backstory for our relationship to avoid awkward questions. "Let's keep it simple," he said, leaning back in a plastic chair at our favorite food truck spot. We met at the community center, hit it off over bad coffee, and now we're, dating casually. "Casually works," I said, though the word felt wrong. There was nothing casual about how easy it was to talk to Jude, how he listened when I rambled about my fears of seeing Theo and Clara. He shared his own stories, growing up in foster care, bouncing between homes until he aged out at 18. "You learn to spot the people who'll stick by you," he said one night, his eyes steady on mine. "And you, Evie, you're one of the good ones." His words stuck with me, warming something I thought had gone cold. But the closer the wedding got, the more the past clawed its way back. I kept thinking about Theo and me as kids. He was always the reckless one, climbing trees too high, sneaking cookies before dinner, while I was the responsible big sister cleaning up his messes. We were close though, or so I thought. We'd spend hours building forts in the backyard, pretending we were explorers. I'd tie that lighthouse keychain to a stick, calling it our beacon, to guide us home. Mum gave it to us during a family trip to Monterey. When I was 10, a cheap souvenir from a gift shop, but to us it was magic. Theo used to say, "Evie, you're my lighthouse. You always know the way. Where did that kid go? How did he become the guy who'd steal my girlfriend and act like it was nothing?" Work was my escape, but even that wasn't safe. One afternoon, I was helping a 15-year-old kid named Mia with her college applications when she asked out of nowhere, "Miss Harper, you ever been betrayed by someone you love?" I froze my pen, hovering over her essay draft. Mia's foster mum had just ditched her for a new boyfriend, so she wasn't asking lightly. "Yeah," I said finally. "It sucks, but you can't let it define you." She nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe me. I didn't believe myself either. The night before we left for Napa, I sat on my couch, the lighthouse keychain in my hand, its edges worn from years of being carried around. I kept thinking about Clara too. We'd been so in love, or at least I thought we were. She was a graphic novelist, always sketching in her notebook, her dark hair falling over her face as she worked. I'd watch her draw and feel like the luckiest person alive. That road trip to Monterey, where we got the keychain, was her idea. We'd stopped at every cheesy tourist spot, laughing until our sides hurt. She'd kissed me under the lighthouse, promising we'd come back someday. Now she was marrying my brother, and I was supposed to clap and smile. Jude picked me up the next morning in his beat-up pickup truck, the kind of vehicle that looked like it had stories of its own. I tossed my bag in the back, the lighthouse keychain clipped to my purse, catching the sunlight. "Ready for the circus?" Jude asked, his grin softening the knot in my chest. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, climbing in. "Thanks for doing this, Jude. I owe you big time." "You owe me nothing," he said, starting the engine. "Except maybe a dance at the reception. I'm a terrible dancer, so you'll get a good laugh." I laughed, but it felt fragile, like it could break any second. The drive to Napa was 3 hours, and we filled it with music and small talk, avoiding the heavy stuff. But as we got closer to the vineyard, my hands started sweating. I kept picturing Theo's smug smile, Clara's guilty eyes, my mum's fake cheer. What if I couldn't handle it? What if I walked in and everyone saw right through me, saw the hurt I was trying so hard to hide? We pulled into the vineyard just as the sun was setting, the rows of grapevines glowing gold. The resort was stunning, all stone and glass, with fairy lights strung across the courtyard. Guests were already mingling for the welcome drinks, their laughter floating through the air. I spotted my mom first, waving frantically from the bar. "Evie, you made it," she called, rushing over to hug me. Her perfume was the same one she'd worn since I was a kid, and for a second I wanted to be 10 again, when family felt safe. "Mom, this is Jude Callahan," I said, stepping back. "My date." Jude shook her hand, his smile easy. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Harper. Evie's told me a lot about you." Mom's eyes lit up, and I could practically hear her planning our wedding already. "Oh, call me Diane. How did you two meet?" she asked, her voice too eager. "Community center," Jude said smoothly. "Evie's the one keeping us all in line." Before Mom could dig deeper, I saw them, Theo and Clara, standing near a fountain surrounded by guests. Clara looked beautiful, in a cream dress, her hair pinned up with tiny flowers. Theo had his arm around her, laughing at something a friend said. They looked so normal, like they hadn't shattered my world. My throat tightened and I gripped Jude's arm without thinking. "You okay?" he whispered, his voice steady. "Not really," I admitted, "but let's get a drink and fake it." We headed to the bar, but Theo spotted me before we got there. "Evie." He called, his voice too loud, like he was performing. He walked over Clara, trailing behind her, smile hesitant. "You came. I wasn't sure you would." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, my voice flatter than I meant. "Congrats, Theo." "Clara." "Thanks," Clara said softly, her eyes searching mine. "It means a lot that you're here, Evie." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Jude stepped in, extending his hand. "Jude Callahan. Congrats to you both." Theo shook his hand, sizing him up. "Nice to meet you, man. You and Evie." "Together," Jude said, his tone leaving no room for questions. I hadn't expected him to say that, but it felt right, like a shield against Theo's smirk. The rest of the evening was a blur of small talk and forced smiles. I caught my dad watching me from across the courtyard, his face unreadable. He hadn't called since the invitation arrived, and I wasn't sure if he was ashamed of Theo or just avoiding the mess. Guests kept coming up to me, some with pity in their eyes, others fishing for gossip. "You're so brave for coming," my Aunt Linda said, patting my arm like I was a wounded animal. I wanted to scream, but I just nodded and sipped my wine. By the time Jude and I got back to our rooms, separate because we weren't there yet, I was exhausted. "You did good," Jude said, leaning against my doorframe. "Tomorrow's the real test, though. Rehearsal dinner, smaller crowd, more pressure." I know, I said, rubbing my temples. I keep seeing that keychain. You know, it's like Clara and Theo took more than my relationship. They took my memories too. Jude looked at me for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving, a tiny star, rough but beautiful. "Made this for you," he said, pressing it into my hand. "Something new to hold on to. You're not just your past, Evie. You're bigger than that." I closed my fingers around the star, my eyes stinging. "Thanks, Jude," I whispered. "For everything." He smiled, soft and real. "Get some sleep. We've got a big day tomorrow." I shut the door and sat on the bed, the wooden star in one hand, the lighthouse keychain in the other. One felt like an anchor, dragging me back to pain. The other felt like a promise of what I wasn't sure. But for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something like hope. The rehearsal dinner was like walking into a room full of mirrors, every glance reflecting something I didn't want to see. It was held in a private dining room at the vineyard, all polished wood and candlelight, with a long table set for the wedding party and immediate family. Jude and I were seated across from Clara's parents, who'd always been kind to me, and next to my dad, who still hadn't said much. Theo and Clara sat at the head of the table playing the perfect couple, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes, or how Theo kept checking his phone under the table. I clutched the wooden star in my pocket, its rough edges grounding me, while the lighthouse keychain stayed tucked in my purse, a quiet reminder of what I was trying to leave behind. Dinner started with polite chatter, but the air was thick with things unsaid. Clara's mum, Lynn, leaned over and squeezed my hand. "Evie, it's so good to see you," she said, her voice warm but cautious. "We've missed you at our Sunday brunches." Her words stung, not because they weren't true, but because they reminded me of the life I'd lost lazy mornings at Clara's parents' house eating her dad's famous pancakes. I smiled and said, "I've missed those too," but my throat felt tight. Jude sensed my unease and jumped in telling a story about a kid at the community center who'd built a birdhouse that looked more like a spaceship. His easy laugh loosened the tension, and even my dad cracked a smile. But then Theo stood to give a toast, his wine glass raised. "To family," he said, his voice smooth, "and to love that finds a way, no matter the obstacles." His eyes flicked to me just for a second, and I felt a jolt of anger. Was that a dig? A challenge? Clara stared at her plate, her knuckles white around her fork. The toasts continued, each one carefully, avoiding the elephant in the room. My mum's was the worst, rambling about forgiveness and new beginnings, like she was auditioning for a Hallmark movie. I wanted to disappear, but Jude's hand brushed mine under the table, steadying me. Then Clara's best friend, Priya, stood up. She'd always been blunt, and I braced myself. "I've known Clara forever," she said, "and I've never seen her happier than she is with Theo. They're proof that sometimes you have to break a few hearts to find your own." The room went quiet, forks, pausing midair. Priya didn't look at me, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who the broken heart was. I felt Jude tense beside me, but before he could say anything, my dad cleared his throat. "Enough of that," he said, his voice low but firm. "We're here to celebrate, not to stir up trouble." It was the first time he'd spoken all night, and I could have hugged him. Priya sat down, her face red, and the conversation stumbled back to safer topics. But the damage was done. I felt exposed, like every guest was waiting for me to crack. After dinner, I slipped out to the terrace for air, the cool night breeze a relief after the stuffy dining room. I pulled the wooden star from my pocket, turning it over in my hands. Jude had made it with his own hands, and that meant someone saw me not as the betrayed sister, but as me. I was so lost in thought I didn't hear Clara approach until she spoke. "Evie, can we talk?" Her voice was soft, almost pleading. I turned my guard up. "What's there to say, Clara?" She fidgeted with her engagement ring, a diamond that looked too big for her hand. "I know I hurt you. I've wanted to apologize for months, but I didn't know how. I need you to know I didn't plan this." "Didn't plan it," I laughed, sharp and bitter. "You were my girlfriend, Clara. You don't accidentally sleep with my brother." "I know," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "It was a mistake at first. Theo was always around, and we started talking, and I don't know, Evie. I felt seen with him in a way I didn't with you." Her words hit like a punch. "What does that even mean, I loved you? I gave you everything I had." "You did," she said, wiping her eyes. "But you were always so together. You had your career, your purpose. I felt like I was just tagging along, like I wasn't enough for you. Theo made me feel like I mattered." I stared at her, the anger mixing with something else, sadness maybe, or realization. Had I made her feel small without knowing it? I thought back to our relationship, how I'd push her to submit her graphic novels to publishers, how I'd plan our future without always asking what she wanted. But that didn't justify what she did. You could have talked to me, I said. Instead, you chose the one person guaranteed to break me. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know. Before I could respond, Theo appeared, his face tight. Clara, they're waiting for you inside. He looked at me, his jaw set. You okay, Evie? Don't, I snapped. Don't act like you care now. He flinched but didn't back down. I do care. You're my sister. I messed up, but I'm not the villain here. You're not, I said, my voice rising. You betrayed me, Theo. You took the one person I loved and acted like it was your right. You don't get to play the good guy. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes darting to Clara. She looked between us, her face pale, then turned and walked back inside. Theo stayed, his hands in his pockets. You think this is easy for me, he said quietly. Knowing you hate me, knowing Dad barely looks at me, I love her, Evie. I didn't mean to, but I do. I didn't. I wanted to scream to tell him love doesn't excuse betrayal, but something in his voice stopped me. He looked tired. Not the confident Theo I knew, but someone carrying a weight I hadn't noticed before. Then why invite me? I asked. Why put me through this? Because you're family, he said. And I thought, maybe we could fix this. I shook my head, too raw to process his words. I need space, Theo. Just leave me alone. He nodded and walked away. His shoulders slumped. I stood there, the wooden star still in my hand, feeling like I'd won a battle but lost something bigger. Jude found me a few minutes later, his tie loosened, a glass of water in his hand. Saw you talking to Clara and Theo, he said, handing me the glass. You holding up? Barely, I said, taking a sip. Clara says she felt invisible with me. Theo says he loves her but wants to fix things with me. It's a mess, Jude. He leaned against the railing, looking out at the dark vineyard. Sounds like they're both carrying their own guilt. But you don't have to carry it for them. I know I said, but it didn't feel that simple. I just keep wondering if I missed something. You know, like was I so focused on being the perfect girlfriend or sister that I didn't see what they needed? Jude turned to me, his eyes serious. Evie, you can't be everything to everyone. You gave them your best. What they did with that, that's on them, not you. His words settled over me, heavy but true. I looked down at the wooden star, its edges catching the moonlight. You're pretty good at this pep talk thing, I said, managing a small smile. Years of practice, he said, nudging my shoulder. Come on, let's get you back to your room. Big day tomorrow. As we walked back, I slipped the star into my pocket, leaving the lighthouse keychain in my purse. For the first time, I felt like I could let go of its weight, even if just a little. Tomorrow was the wedding, and I wasn't sure what it would bring. But I knew one thing, I wasn't the same. Evie, who'd opened that invitation. I was stronger, or at least I was getting there. The morning of the wedding dawned too bright, like the universe was mocking me with perfect weather. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, the kind that makes you want to pull the covers over your head and pretend the world doesn't exist. But I couldn't. Today was Theo and Clara's wedding, and I'd come this far. I wasn't backing out now. Marcus had texted me at 6 a.m. You got this, Evie. Show them you're unbreakable. Easier said than done. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the wooden star in my hand, its rough edges a quiet comfort. My purse was on the dresser, the lighthouse keychain peeking out, glinting in the sunlight. I didn't touch it. Not today. Jude knocked on my door at 9 already, in his suit, a sharp navy number that made him look like he belonged in a magazine, not a beat-up pickup truck. You clean up nice, I said, trying to keep things light. He grinned, adjusting his tie. Wait till you see me trip over my own feet on the dance floor. You ready? No, I admitted slipping the star into my pocket, but I'm doing it anyway. The ceremony was in the vineyard's garden rows, of white chairs facing a wooden arch draped in roses. Jude and I took our seats in the 4th row, close enough to be seen, but not so close I'd feel like part of the show. The air buzzed with whispers as guests filled in their eyes, darting to me, then away. I heard my cousin Jenna's voice behind me. Can't believe she showed up. Bet she's dying inside. I gripped Jude's hand and he squeezed back his thumb, tracing a small circle on my skin. Ignore them, he whispered. You're here for you. The music started a soft violin melody, and Theo took his place at the arch, looking nervous in his tux. The bridesmaids came next, all in pale blue, followed by Clara, on her dad's arm. She was stunning, her white gown flowing like water, her face half hidden by a veil. My chest tightened not with jealousy, but with a strange ache for what we'd had. I remembered her laugh, her sketches, the way she'd hum off key in the shower. That Clara felt like a ghost, now replaced by this stranger marrying my brother. The vows were short, almost rushed. Theo stumbled over his words, and Clara's voice shook like she was holding something back. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, a few heads turned my way, but I just stared straight ahead, Jude's hand steady in mine. They were pronounced husband and wife, and the crowd clapped as they kissed. I clapped too mechanically, feeling nothing but a dull relief that it was over. The cocktail hour was easier with people distracted by wine and appetizers. Jude and I stuck close, deflecting nosy questions with practiced ease. My mum pulled me aside at one point, her eyes misty. I'm so proud of you, Evie, she said. This can't be easy, but you're being so strong. Thanks, Mom, I said. But her words felt hollow. Strength wasn't what I felt. It was survival. I caught my dad watching Theo from across the lawn, his face hard. He hadn't walked Clara down the aisle her dad had, and I wondered if that was his silent protest. The reception was in a grand ballroom, all chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows. Our table was with my parents, Clara's parents, and a couple of Theo's college friends, a safe enough mix. Dinner passed without incident, but I noticed Theo and Clara barely looked at each other. She kept twisting her new wedding ring, and he was on his phone again, his jaw tight. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just my imagination. Then came the toasts. Theo's best man, Ryan, gave a generic speech about love and commitment. Clara's sister, Mia, talked about Clara's big heart. I was starting to tune out when Clara stood unscripted, grabbing the microphone. Her hands were shaking, and her voice was unsteady. I want to say something, she said, the room falling silent. Theo and we're so grateful you're all here. But I need to be honest. Our love story, it didn't start the way it should have. My stomach dropped. Jude leaned closer, his arm brushing mine. Clara's eyes found me, and for a second I thought she might cry. I hurt someone I loved, she said. Evie, you were my first love, and I betrayed you. I told myself it was because I was unhappy, but that's no excuse. I was selfish, and I'm sorry. Theo and we thought we could build something real, but I've been carrying this guilt, and it's heavier than I expected. The room was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. Theo stared at her, his face pale like he hadn't seen this coming. My mom gasped, and my dad's hand tightened around his glass. Clara kept going, her voice breaking. I invited you here, Evie, because I thought it would make things right, but I was wrong. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed to say this in front of everyone, because you deserve to know you were never the problem. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every eye was on me, waiting for a reaction. Jude's hand found mine under the table, but I barely felt it. Clara sat down, tears streaming down her face, and Theo reached for her, but she pulled away. The band started playing, trying to cover the awkwardness, but the room was buzzing with whispers. I don't know what made me stand up. Maybe it was the weight of all those eyes or the years of carrying pain I didn't ask for. I grabbed my glass, my hands steady, despite the storm inside me. Can I say something? I asked, my voice louder than I expected. The band stopped and the room turned to me expectant. I wasn't going to do this. I started looking at Clara, then Theo. I came here because I thought I needed to prove I was okay, that I could handle seeing my ex and my brother get married. But Clara's right. This isn't how love stories should start. You hurt me, both of you. In a way, I'm still trying to understand. But I'm not here to hold on to that hurt anymore. I'm here to let it go. I turned to the crowd, my voice growing stronger. I've spent months thinking I wasn't enough, not enough for Clara, not enough for my family. But I'm done with that. I'm enough for me. And I'm building a life that's mine with people who see me for who I am. I glanced at Jude, his eyes warm with something that made my heart skip. So here's to new beginnings, not just for Theo and Clara, but for me too. The room erupted in applause louder than I expected. Jude stood clapping his grin wide and others followed. Clara was crying openly now, and Theo looked like he'd been punched. My parents were staring at me. My mum with tears in her eyes. My dad with a quiet pride I hadn't seen in years. I sat down, my legs shaking, and Jude leaned in. "That was incredible," he whispered. "You okay?" "I think so," I said, and for the first time I meant it. The knot in my chest was loosening, not gone, but lighter. The reception continued, but the energy had shifted. People kept coming up to me, not with pity, but with respect. "That took guts," one of Theo's friends said. Clara's mum hugged me, whispering, "You're a class act, Evie." Even my cousin Jenna, the gossip queen, was quiet, just nodding, like she finally got it. I stepped outside later, needing a moment to breathe. The vineyard was dark, the stars bright above the grapevines. I pulled the wooden star from my pocket, its weight familiar now. Jude joined me, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up. "You stole the show in there," he said, his voice teasing but soft. "Didn't mean to," I said. I couldn't let Clara's words be the last ones. "I get it," he said, leaning against a fence post. "You took back your story, that's not small." We stood there, the silence comfortable. I looked at him. Really looked, and saw someone who'd been there, through the worst of this. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "Jude," I said, my voice quiet, "why'd you say yes to this? To being my fake date for a wedding from hell?" He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Honestly, I said yes because I wanted an excuse to spend time with you. The fake part. That was just a cover. I've been falling for you since the first time we stayed up talking about your terrible taste in pizza toppings." I laughed, the sound surprising me. "Pineapple is a perfectly valid topping." "It's a crime," he said, stepping closer. "But I'm willing to overlook it. Because you, Evie Harper, are worth it." He reached for my hand and I let him, the wooden star still between my fingers. For a moment we just stood there. The vineyard quiet around us, and I felt something shift. Not just in me, but between us. This wasn't about Theo or Clara anymore. It was about what I wanted, and for the first time in a long time I knew what that was. The weeks after the wedding felt like waking up from a long, strange dream. I drove back to San Francisco with Jude, the vineyard fading in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was running from something. The lighthouse keychain was still in my purse, but I hadn't touched it since the wedding. Instead, I kept the wooden star in my pocket, its rough edges a reminder that I'd faced my worst fears and come out stronger. Clara's confession and my speech had shifted something, not just in me, but in how I saw my family, my past, and what I wanted next. Life didn't magically fix itself, though. Theo and Clara's marriage hit rough waters almost immediately. My mum called a week after the wedding, her voice low, like she was sharing a secret. "They're fighting Evie," she said. "Clara's staying with her parents for a bit." I think her speech at the reception stirred things up. I wasn't surprised. Clara's guilt had been raw public, and Theo didn't strike me as someone who'd handle that kind of exposure well. Part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it faded fast. Their mess wasn't my victory. I was done letting their choices define me. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Elena Ruiz, on Marcus's recommendation. She was tough but kind, the kind of person who could call you out without making you feel small. "You've been carrying a lot of weight that isn't yours," she said during our first session. "Your brother's betrayal, Clara's guilt, your parents' expectations. What happens if you set that down?" The question stuck with me. I'd spent so long trying to be the good sister, the strong one, that I'd forgotten how to just be Evie. Therapy became a place to figure that out, one messy conversation at a time. Work felt different too. I'd always loved my job at the community center, but after the wedding, I threw myself into it with new purpose. I started a mentorship program for teens like Mia, the girl who'd asked me about betrayal. We met weekly, talking about college dreams and the hard stuff, family drama, heartbreak, finding your place. Mia gave me a drawing, one day, a pencil sketch of a lighthouse on a stormy cliff. "It's you, Miss Harper," she said. "You help us find our way." I teared up, tucking the drawing into my bag next to the lighthouse keychain. For the first time, that keychain didn't feel like pain. It felt like a bridge between who I'd been and who I was becoming. Jude and I were spending more time together, not as a fake couple, but as something real. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was slow, steady, like building a house you know will last. We'd grab coffee after work, wander through Golden Gate Park, or sit in his workshop while he carved wooden figures, a bird, a tree, another star. One night over takeout, in his tiny apartment, he told me about his foster care days, how he'd learned to keep people at arm's length to protect himself. "But with you," he said, setting down his chopsticks, "I don't want to do that. I want you to know me, the good and the bad." "I want that too," I said, my heart racing. "But I'm scared, Jude. What if I'm not ready? What if I mess this up?" "Then we mess it up together," he said, his smile soft. "No pressure, Evie. Just us figuring it out." That was the moment I knew I was falling for him. Not because he was perfect, but because he saw me, scars and all, and chose to stay. We kissed that night. Not under some romantic vineyard sky, but on his lumpy couch, with lo mein containers on the table. It felt right, like coming home. 2 months after the wedding, my dad asked me to meet him for lunch at a diner near his office. He'd been quiet since the reception, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Over burgers and fries, he looked at me with tired eyes. "I owe you an apology, Evie," he said. "I should have stood up for you when Theo and Clara started. Whatever they were doing, I didn't know how to handle it, so I didn't. That wasn't fair to you." I stirred my milkshake, surprised by his words. "It's okay, Dad. I know it was messy for everyone." "No, it's not okay," he said, his voice firm. "You're my daughter, and I let you down. Watching you at that wedding, speaking your truth. I've never been prouder. You're stronger than I ever was." His words hit me hard, cracking open a part of me I'd kept locked away. "Thanks, Dad," I said, my voice thick. "That means a lot." We didn't hug. Dad's not the hugging type, but he squeezed my hand across the table, and that was enough. Clara reached out a month later, a text, asking if we could talk. I almost ignored it, but Dr. Ruiz's voice echoed in my head. "Set the boundaries you need, but don't close doors. You might want to open later." I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop, neutral ground. She looked different, thinner. Her eyes shadowed. "Theo and I are separated," she said, stirring her latte. "After the wedding, we couldn't stop fighting. I think I rushed into it, trying to prove something." I sipped my coffee, letting her words settle. "I'm sorry it didn't work out," I said, and I meant it. "But why tell me?" "Because I owe you more than an apology," she said. "I was wrong about so much, Evie. I thought Theo saw me in a way you didn't. But it wasn't about you. It was about me, my own insecurities. I hurt you, and I'll carry that forever." I nodded, feeling a strange calm. "I'm not ready to be friends, Clara. Maybe someday, but not now. I need time to heal, and I need you to respect that." "I will," she said, her eyes wet. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. That speech. You were incredible." I smiled, small but real. "Thanks. I'm working on being incredible for me." We parted ways, not as enemies, not as friends, but as two people who'd hurt each other and were trying to move forward. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't hate Theo either. He'd sent me a letter a week earlier, short and handwritten, apologizing for the pain he'd caused. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he wrote, but I'm trying to be better. I hadn't replied, but I kept the letter tucked away with the lighthouse keychain. Maybe one day I'd write back. 3 months after the wedding, I organized a fundraiser at the community center, a talent show for the kids. Mia performed a poem she'd written, her voice strong despite her nerves. Jude built a wooden stage for the event, his hands steady with a hammer, in a way that made me smile. My parents came sitting in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. It was the first time I'd seen them since the diner, and it felt like a step towards something new. After the show, Jude and I stayed late cleaning up streamers and stacking chairs. The center was quiet, the kids' artwork lining the walls. I pulled the wooden star from my pocket, turning it over in my hands. You know, I said, when you gave me this, I wasn't sure I deserved it. I felt like I was drowning, like I'd never find my way out. And now, Jude asked, leaning against the stage, his eyes warm. Now I feel like I'm finding my light, I said. Not because of you, though you're a big part of it. Because I'm choosing it. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from my face. That's the Evie I see, he said. The one who doesn't just survive, but shines. I kissed him then, under the fluorescent lights of a community center gym, and it was better than any vineyard or sunset. It was ours, real and unpolished. As we locked up, I noticed the lighthouse keychain on a shelf in the center next to Mia's drawing. I unclipped it and set it there, leaving it behind. It wasn't mine anymore, not in the way it used to be. It was a memory, not a chain. Driving home with Jude, the city lights blurring past, I felt a quiet joy I hadn't known was possible. The wedding that had once loomed like a storm had become the start of something else, a life where I wasn't defined by betrayal, but by the choices I made after. Theo and Clara were part of my story, but they weren't the ending. I was writing that myself, with Jude by my side. My family slowly healing, and a community that reminded me every day what it meant to belong. If you'd told me 6 months ago that a lighthouse keychain would lead me here, I wouldn't have believed you. But sometimes the things that break you open are the same things that let the light in. I'm not perfect, and my life isn't a fairy tale. But it's mine, and I'm choosing to live it fully, bravely, with a wooden star in my pocket and a heart that's learning to trust again.